Hey, welcome everybody. As been mentioned, my name is Ron. I'm the lead pastor here at Vitalpoint Church, and I am so thankful you are here today. A couple things before we jump into the message. I want to talk about the year-end giving. Super excited about this. Every year we talk about the year-end gift and how important it is to continue to fuel the vision and mission of Vitalpoint Church as we honor God with our resources. And what is exciting about this year-end is that our leadership board has decided to take 10% of what comes in over the month of December and split it between two organizations. One is Alpha and one is Awana. These two organizations are dear to us as a church. We love these organizations and we want to bless them at this Christmas season. So I want to encourage you, if you're thinking about giving or giving extra this December, it's all going to be, we're going to take 10% of it and give it to these two organizations. Last thing is Christmas. We know we've been pounding this. We've been talking about this. Get your tickets for yourself, for your friends. I believe we have almost 900 tickets out for over 4 locations, 10 services. It's going to be a Christmas to remember. All right. So here we are. We're at the very end of our Exodus and Jesus series, and we're going to wrap it all up today, and I hope that it will be impactful for your life as we bring it to a conclusion. If you've been journeying with us over the last 11 weeks, that's right, 11-week series, it is incredible. You know that we've been using a word to describe the story of the Exodus found in the second book of the Old Testament. We've been using this word, epic. And it is true. This story has been epic. Think about it. Slavery, murder, plagues, battles, impossible water crossings. A pillar that's God's presence defined as a cloud and a fire. God's provision of miracle meal called manna. It's a classic battle between good and evil. There's a villain named Pharaoh. There's a reluctant hero named Moses that God pulls off the bench. It truly is an epic story. It's awe-inspiring, it's monumental, it's legendary. But I believe we need to introduce a different word to describe the Exodus story, and it's this word. It's the word essential. Essential, just as air is essential to our lungs and water is to life. The story is an essential piece of God's broader redemptive story. It's essential for us to truly understand the heart of God and a desire to be part of a people that are set apart for his purposes. It's essential for us to understand God's mercy, God's justice, God's holiness. It's essential for us to hear this story because it reveals a deeper truth of who Jesus is. It's an exciting story that emerges into our lives. And I love hearing the stories of what God has been doing in people's lives through the course of this series. Hearing people that are using the extra material that we're creating, going further in the course of the week where you're reading and studying together. Some couples doing this together, connect groups, diving in and just enjoying the conversation around Exodus and Jesus. One moment sticks out to me after a service a number of weeks ago in Poplar Hill. A young woman pulled me aside and she said, I've been praying for an opportunity to talk to my university roommates. And God opened the door. And what was so beautiful was that she was able to describe who God is by using the Exodus story. Why? Because it's essential. It helps us better understand God. Now, if you're exploring faith and maybe you're new to this idea of Jesus and the Christian faith, my hope is that it piqued your interest. That something inside of you is maybe being drawn forward to explore more about what the Bible is all about, who Jesus is. You're beginning to see the link between the Old Testament and the New Testament. You're beginning to see the essential parts of the story, and your curiosity is really being piqued at this moment. Or maybe you're already a follower of Jesus. Maybe you've been a follower of Jesus for a long time and you're familiar with the story, the Exodus story. And going through this 11 weeks, what has happened for you is that your faith has been reignited. Because what happens sometimes when we're so familiar with the story, our faith becomes a little bit boring and dry and dusty. And I believe that this story has reignited inside some of us to help us better understand and make us more aware of how essential the story is. Because here's the thing, the Exodus story is essential because it's our story. It's our story. Each and every single one of us are on this journey of trying to discover freedom that we're trying to have in our own lives. We recognize that we have these things that hold us captive, or this idea of spiritual slavery because of sin, or maybe we look at our lives and we are chained to shame and guilt and pain, or maybe there's addictive patterns and we're all trying to find some sort of freedom. And we've recognized that we can't muster it up on ourselves. We can't manifest it on our own. Just like the Israelites, they could not deliver themselves from slavery. They were 400 plus years in slavery. They couldn't find a way out, but God provided a way for them. I think it's important for us to understand how critical this is, because the essential part of the story is us leading us to a place of understanding Jesus, where he truly is the one that brings freedom, hope, healing, purpose, and peace in our lives. See, the story is essential to the bigger narrative of faith and points us to the reality of Jesus. That's why it's not just an epic story, it's an essential story. Now, let me do something for us before we dive into the section that was read for us, and I'm going to expand on that a little bit and read a few other verses that were read for us today. I want to give you a bit of a picture of the end of the story, because I think sometimes we have this idea that the stories in the Bible always have a fairy tale ending. Because for Moses, this is not a fairy tale ending. We would think that he would enter into the promised land that God had told him that God's people would be part of, but the reality is he missed out on it. God's people were complaining again, and they're doing this often. They would whine and complain to Moses, and he would have to deal with it, and he'd go before God, and this time they're complaining again about no water, and you can find this in Numbers chapter 20. And God and Moses have this conversation, and God says to Moses, what I want you to do is I want you to speak to a rock, and I'm going to bring water from this rock. And this has happened before in the past, and God had asked Moses to strike a rock with his staff, and the water came from it. But this time God says, I just want you to speak to it. It's interesting because what Moses does is he doesn't obey God. He actually goes to a rock and he taps it twice. And that was his downfall. Look what it says in these verses in Numbers chapter 20, verse 12. It says, and the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. See, Moses was trying to take the glory away from God and put it upon himself. I hear you, God. I know that you want me to just speak to the rock, but I'm going to do what's familiar to me, and I want them to be impressed with what I have done, because I'm actually going to tap the rock twice. It was his lack of obedience. It was his lack of faith and his unwillingness to show the people who God was. Moses wanted the people to look at him. This is an obedience issue for Moses. Now, you might look at this and you might think to yourself, whoa, this is pretty harsh. It's a little bit over the top, don't you think? But I think it's important for us to understand that faith isn't just simply a step trusting in Jesus. That faith is actually lived out in obedience to the authority of Jesus in our lives. That God desires us to walk in obedience, that he desires for us to walk in obedience in our relationships and how we use our bodies and money and marriage and our sexuality. The list can go on and on. We look at this and we say, okay, we begin to realize that yes, God does love us deeply and he wants to be in relationship with us, but yet there's also this idea of walking in obedience under the authority of Jesus. Now, what's interesting, even though Moses tapped the rock twice, water still came from it. So God did provide. But there were consequences to the action of Moses in this moment. And we recognize how Moses in the story misses out. I bring this to you more so just to help you understand the reality of the Bible, that the Bible doesn't hide these things, that the Bible speaks to the truth of how often it is difficult to walk in obedience to God. Now, let's set that aside just so that you know the end of what happened for Moses and a number of the Israelites. I want to jump now back into and wrap up the series because we've been really digging deep on some of these topics and ideas that we've been exploring. So what I want to do is I want to take you to the broader understanding of what the story is really trying to do for us. And it's this: that God has been progressively showing us more of who he is. It is a progression of God revealing himself to the Israelites, because here's the thing: they had very limited knowledge of God. And so through the course of the story, what God is revealing is that he wanted to be in relationship with them, with Moses and with them, but he also was in progression revealing more of who he is. But in that, he's also revealing more of the plan that would lead to the ultimate redemption through the person of Jesus Christ. So what we have is this beautiful foreknowledge of leading us to the power of this moment in the story. And it's God's desire to be in relationship with people. Now, it's interesting because what was read for us about Moses and so on, I want to expand on that and read verses 34 and 35 and lead us to this place of talking about God's glory, this veil thing, and I'm going to unpack it for us as much as I can. So let me read it for you, Exodus 34. Whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would remove the veil until he came out. And when he came out and told the people of Israel what he was commanded, the people of Israel would see the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face was shining. And Moses would put the veil over his face again until he went to speak with people. So think about this. Moses would spend time with God, and there would be physical evidence that he had been with God. In essence, there was a glow about Moses. His face would glow, his skin. There was a visible manifestation of the glory of God that was on him. His holiness was on Moses. And it serves us as a reminder that Moses was a mediator between God and his people in that time. So the glow is this reflection. It's this time spent with God and the transforming power of being with God. So here's an interesting truth that might help us. When you spend time with God, you cannot remain the same. You will change. Moses changed. Moses removed the veil, went into the tent, met with God, and the glory of God shone upon him. And when he went out, there was evidence that he was there. Now, think about this. This all happened after the people of God worshiped the golden calf. I want you to think about how important this is. This happened after Moses broke the first tablets of the 10 Commandments. Now, he's got a second set already in this particular moment. This all happens after the fickleness of their faith, the wandering, the whining, and the complaining. What I love about this moment is that God still wants to be with the people. Even though they show that they're unfaithful and they wander and they complain, God still desires to be with them. And it's evident through his time with Moses, right? It's the spillover effect of the glow into the people. Now, this is an important truth because sometimes we think that God is not for us. We think sometimes that we're maybe too far gone, or maybe you look at someone in your life and you think they're just too far gone, or maybe you've got a child, an adult child that's gone off the rails in their life, and you're like, man, there's just no way. Here's the beauty of it. There's this reality that God still desires to be in relationship with them in spite of their unfaithfulness to him. That's a powerful truth. That's God's grace. That's God's patience. That's God's mercy that we see evident in this moment. But we have to ask about the veil. Like, I think there's something about the veil that's so peculiar, and I think we need to examine it just a little bit to kind of help us see where it lands for us today. So the veil would be speaking of a system which would be called the Old Covenant. So this was a period of time where God's promise was set before the people, but yet not fulfilled. So the old covenant is an incomplete temporary covenant that God had made with his people, which would help us understand that it's leading to the reality of a new covenant that would be found in the person of Jesus Christ. So the veil is a necessary piece to help us understand that there's a separation between God and the people. So there's the sinfulness of us or the people, and the veil is that separation between us and the glory of God. So Moses removed the veil when he went into the tent, and then when he came out of the tent, after he spent time with God, he would cover himself up again, and that is helping us see and understand the truth that there is this separation. Now, keep in mind, remember, it is a progression of God leading us somewhere. It's a timeline of his redemptive, restorative work through the person of Jesus Christ. So this is leading us to that place. So the veil is critical to the story. It's critical to us because there is this separation. Moses' role is what? We talked about this. His role is to go before God on behalf of the people, and then he would deliver the message to the people. So again, that word mediator, it's an important word. And the mediator with the veil is that separation piece. It's that temporary thing that's in place. Because what? It's leading us all to Jesus. This is what we have to keep remembering about the story as God is revealing himself in the progressive work of the restorative work in Jesus Christ. So the veil is speaking very clearly to something. There's something that separates us from God and the mediator part of it. Now, what is so beautiful about this is that the New Testament begins to reveal that piece to us. This is the linking piece for us. Look at these verses in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 5 and 6. For there is one God, and there is one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself as a ransom for all, which is the testimony given at the proper time. Okay, remember, it's a foreshadowing. Now, all of a sudden, we have this linking passage in the New Testament that helps us understand that Jesus becomes the mediator. What is a mediator? It's a person that bridges a gap between two parties. I got this friend who has a mediator business when people are separating. He steps in before the lawyers and he tries to, actually his heart is that they reconcile. It's beautiful. And so he's a mediator. He goes between the two that are separating. What we see here is that Jesus is the mediator. So you got Moses, who is temporary, leading us to Jesus, who is permanent. He is the permanent mediator between us and God. Why? Because he gave his life as a ransom. Moses couldn't do that. He was just a human being like you and me. Jesus, who was the Son of God, gave his life prioritizing our what? Our freedom. This is the power of what the mediator does. He gave his life as a ransom to pay for our sin, and that is what we call the cross of Jesus Christ. So Jesus now becomes a mediator to restore our relationship with God, and in that, bringing us freedom to live into a new identity with the person of Jesus Christ in our lives. Isn't that amazing? I mean, this is a powerful truth because not only does Jesus become the mediator between us and God, but he becomes a mediator who identifies with our lives. He identifies with our struggles. He identifies with our pain. Have you ever sat with someone that is not going through what you're going through and they try to help you? They try to speak into your life. And it's nice and it's fine and it's good that can happen, but they've not walked that path. It's kind of like it doesn't really land well. But when you sit with someone who has been through what you have been through, it just lands different. Like when I sit with a teenager that has lost a parent to cancer and I can look them square in the face and say, I know what that is like. It's completely different. Jesus, the mediator, understands and wants to walk with us in our burden, in our struggle, and in our pain. Why? Because he knows what it's like. He knows what it's like to be lonely. He knows what it's like to be misunderstood or rejected and not wanted, betrayed by someone that you love. He knows what it's like to lose a friend who dies. He knows what it's like to be tempted, and thankfully he was without sin. He knows what it's like to face death in the face and the agony and the pain. He knows what it's like when your kid gets bullied at school. He knows what it's like to walk in your shoes. This is the beauty of the Christian faith when you really think about it. This is the foundational truth that we love so much, is that God became one of us. Next week, at Vitalpoint Church on December 21st and 22nd, we are going to celebrate this powerful truth that Jesus became one of us, that the Son of God, that God became one of us. See, the truth about Christ is that he's not like a traffic cop that stands at the intersection trying to give us directions to life. He actually is the way to life. He is the way to true freedom. This is the heart of God. This is the desire of God to be in relationship with us. And that's why the story is what? Essential. Say that with me. Essential. Some of you didn't say it. Essential to the reality of understanding who we are before God. Now, I want to go back to the veil. I want to go back to the veil again. It behooves me. I'm going to challenge you to use that word today somewhere in a sentence. It behooves me. I am compelled to go back to the veil because the veil is a very interesting connector point between the Old Testament and the New Testament. I want to read for you a couple verses, some verses that are more than a couple verses. It's actually found in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 12 through 18. And I want you to see the connection here. This is going to blow your minds. All right, ready for this? It says, since we have such a hope, we are very bold. So Paul is writing to the church at Corinth. Not like Moses, who would put a veil over his face so that the Israelites might not gaze at the outcome of what was being brought to the end. But their minds were hardened. For to this day, when they read the old covenant, that same veil remains unlifted because only Christ can lift that from our eyes. Oh, take that away. Yes, to this day, whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their hearts. Verse 16. But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we all, with unveiled faces, behold the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is Spirit. What is Paul saying? Paul is saying the veil hides the glory of God. It separates us. So there's a veil over our hearts, over our minds, and over our eyes. The veil is sin. It separates us from God. Just as Moses wore that veil and kept the glory from them, so it is true for us. This is incredible. Verse 16, it says, but when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. But, we love that but in there. Not that but, you know what I'm talking about. But when one turns to the Lord, Jesus, the mediator, removes the veil where we find true freedom. For God's people, Moses was that temporary. Jesus is the ultimate one that removes the veil where we have full access to him. It's not your parents' faith. It's not your pastor's faith. It's not your priest. It is the Lord that removes the veil. The veil symbolizes our spiritual blindness. So, for some of us who are exploring faith, not yet followers of Jesus, some of us are waiting to take a step of faith until we have all of our questions answered. And the truth is this: you cannot answer your way into a relationship with Jesus. You can't. Now, don't mishear me. Curiosity and questions are part of the process. They really are. We have a program called Alpha that we run. It's a place where we bring our questions, where we explore, where we share our doubts and try to find answers. But the truth is this: you will remain spiritually blind if you do not turn to the Lord. You will not experience the internal transformation of the glory of God in a relationship with Jesus Christ by the power of the Spirit if you do not turn to the Lord. See, when the veil is removed, we begin to grasp more of the glory of God, and we step into the freedom that he has for us by the Spirit of God. And this is the vitality of our faith. This is the place where we have unwavering faith to step into the freedom that he offers to us, where we no longer have to live in fear and condemnation. We no longer have to strive to figure out how to earn God's favor. We don't have to wait until we have the final question answered and then I take a step, because the reality is this: you will not know what it's like to be spiritually alive until you turn to the Lord. And when you do, that glory fills your life. This week I met with this young guy at our church. And he's been asking God big questions about direction and what to do with his life. And we spent almost 2 hours together. It was incredible. And at one point he said, and his faith has just become so alive this year. He said to me, he said, Ron, he says, it's crazy. I don't have to bring up faith because people ask me what has changed in my life. What's gone on there? The veil has been removed. The glory of God has entered into his life through the person of Jesus Christ, and he's increasing from glory to glory. He's been captured by the glory of God, and the reality is he's been consumed with the glory of God in relationship, and it is reflected in his life. I love this part. When we're captured by the glory of God, we can't help but reflect the glory. Why? The veil is lifted and removed, and we increase. I love what Paul says here, that we actually, to one degree of glory to another, there's an aspect of the increase in this relationship. The radiance and the character and the wonder and the awe of God fills us in the person of Jesus Christ. See, if you're a follower of Jesus, I'm just going to say something that may shock you, but if you're a follower of Jesus, I want you to understand it's not that the end goal is to become Jesus. That's impossible. There's only one Jesus. The reality is, in relationship to Jesus, is that you will begin to reflect and radiate the glory of Jesus in your life. The qualities and the characteristics of the transformation. This is what would be what some might call the ultimate kingdom glow up. Some of you are like, what is glow up, right? I didn't have a clue what glow up was. And a few weeks ago, we had some people in our house, and this couple was showing me a picture of themselves when they were a teenager, and then, they're adults now, and they said something about glow up, and I'm like 55 years old, and I was too afraid to ask what it was, and I just nodded my head and smiled, and like, this is great. Later on, I asked my son, my oldest son, like, what in the world is a glow up? And he says, oh, Dad. He says, you were once butt ugly, but now you look pretty good. So in other words, you were super awkward as a teenager, but something happened when you became an adult and you look a whole lot better now. Now, it's what happens if you go backwards. I don't know. That's a different talk. But the reality is, in relationship to the Lord, with the veil removed, it is the ultimate glow up. Why? Because sin has distorted our lives, and Christ has brought the newness of life and freedom. Our appearance in sin is a brokenness. And this is why sometimes when you see people who give their lives to Christ, their things change, their face change, the brightness in their eyes. They no longer look like they're carrying the burdens of the world because something has been lifted. Why? There is freedom. The ultimate glow up. So I want to ask you something as followers of Jesus. Have you been spending enough time with God that people will see his glory in you? I'm not saying be weird, obnoxious, and annoying. I'm just saying, do you prioritize the time with God like Moses? I love this story in Acts of a couple of disciples that people looked at. They said, these guys are uneducated. They're not that bright. They're not that smart, but there's evidence they've been with Jesus. See, I think sometimes we reflect more of the podcasts that we listen to, or reflect more of the social media that we listen to, or the going down the conspiracy theory wormholes on YouTube. We reflect more of those things than maybe reflect our time with Jesus. What would it look like to glow up, to reflect his glory? You're looking at me right now and you're like, dude, I don't even know if I'm a follower of Jesus. You're like, I've been on this journey with the Exodus and Jesus, but I'm not a follower of Jesus yet. I'm going to say, why not? Why not? Why don't you turn to the Lord and have the veil removed? What would it look like for you just to say, I'm not going to wait to have the questions answered. I'm going to step by faith and turn to the Lord. Because when you do, the veil is removed and you begin to experience and know the freedom that you're searching for. You begin to find the peace and the meaning of life and the purpose in life. You begin to find what you have been looking for. Our Exodus story is not just an epic story. It's an essential story that we need because it is our story, where we find the true freedom in Jesus as we turn to him.